This video is brought to you by channel partner 4 years running, Squarespace. Stick around to learn more about them, as well as a special offer they're making available through my channel.
Alright, Suicide Squad killed the Justice League. I want to start by saying that a lot of the commentary around this game suggests that it's phoned in, lazy, uninspired, unoriginal, etc. I do not agree with that. In fact, one of the things that I respect about this game is the fact that there's actually quite a bit of ambition and originality here, and there was a fearlessness with which Rocksteady approached this whole thing. On a narrative level, the phrase "kill your darlings" has never been more apt, and the events of this game will elicit a response from you one way or the other. Like, if you haven't seen spoilers to this point, you might try to guess how this story plays out and where it ends, but you would be wrong. That doesn't make the story good, but it does make it stark. And in an era where superhero stories often feel a little played out across most forms of mass media, the ambition to tell a stark story is commendable. Similarly, on the gameplay front, there's never been a gameplay model quite like this one. You can look at Sunset Overdrive or Crackdown as being the closest points of comparison, but there's still a great distance between those games and this. The combination of traversal, guns, melee attacks, abilities, and afflictions, all augmented by passive bonuses provided by your skill tree and some active gameplay modifiers applied by your gear. It's genuinely new. If you start digging into things like itemization design, you can see that it's also quite robust. Even at launch, Suicide Squad is providing significantly more buildcraft options than 95% of other looters at their launch. And don't even get me started on this game's presentation, because holy shit, when it comes to that stuff, Suicide Squad is legitimately industry leading in many aspects. Character designs, facial animations, the quality of the voice work, the cutscene direction, the art design of the precious few internal spaces we get to enjoy, all of this is a straight 10, and I think that even the most strident critics of this game are willing to acknowledge that. So that's why I don't think Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is lazy or uninspired or unambitious. I don't think Rocksteady sat on their hands for 7 or 8 years, turned around last minute and farted out something half-baked and broken. Rather, I think Rocksteady made some very early decisions that were the wrong decisions. And after that, the studio then needed to figure out a way to make these things work, and I think that in almost every core aspect, they failed to do that. The decision to kill the Justice League, that is a decision that Rocksteady would have made very early on in this project, and when we talk about boss encounters and narrative, I don't think anyone can disagree that Rocksteady absolutely failed categorically to make that work. The decision for all combat to be centered on guns instead of combat kits unique to each anti-hero, that immediately brings with it a great risk of homogenization across the different characters, like they'd all feel too similar to play. Rocksteady did not manage to solve this problem, and the result is that while traversal options are distinct, the overall feel of playing each character is nowhere as distinct as it needs to be, especially given that these are existing anti-heroes with established combat styles. The decision to make this game a live service with a campaign aiming to appeal to both single-player focused Arkham fans and the long-tail focused looter-shooter crowd, that's a big decision that often results in half-baked campaigns and undercooked endgames. Did Rocksteady manage to sidestep either of these issues? Absolutely not. Campaign mission design is so bad that it's almost a parody, and the endgame is woefully anemic. For each of these things I just listed, Rocksteady's developers have done their absolute best to work within these constraints, and some of what they produced is fantastic. You can point to the campaign's exceptional presentation and facial animations, but it doesn't change the fact that the boss fight against Superman involves shooting him with a minigun. You can point to the deep and flexible itemization system supporting combat, but it doesn't change the fact that combat is a tragic mess of half-baked gunplay, shallow melee, and nausea-inducing camera work and visual noise. You can point to some of the better aspects of the endgame, like the world tier challenges or the event modifiers, but it doesn't change the fact that the core endgame is running the same 3 boring-ass open-world style missions over and over and over again. Rocksteady's developers have done a pretty remarkable job with the brief that was handed to them, but the bottom line is that the people who laid down the foundations for this game laid down the wrong foundations. It's resulted in a deeply compromised launch product, and I strongly suspect that these shaky foundations will undermine the game's live service potential as well. Like I said in my preview, I just can't see how this works as a live service, and given that nearly a decade of Rocksteady's time and potential has been spent on this thing, it just seems like a tragic waste.
We're all villains here.
With you so far.
What the hell have you set us into? It's a bloody war zone out here!
We found evil Batman.
Why don't you just mail me the bullet?
Alright, so we're going to talk about the story, and I'm actually going to divide this section in two. The first part will have some minor spoilers, nothing major. The second part will do full spoilers, but I'm going to have a timestamp warning for that bit so you can just jump ahead if you don't want any of that stuff spoiled. I've also had to borrow some gameplay footage from across the internet as I lost some of my campaign footage due to a recording issue. Thank you to those whose footage I stole. I will credit those people in the top right hand corner when I use their stuff. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a story about the Suicide Squad trying to kill the Justice League. Why do you want to kill them? Well, setting aside the fact that the Suicide Squad are all villains who have plenty of beef with the Justice League's members, those members have also been brainwashed by Brainiac, an extraterrestrial baddie who's arrived to conquer Earth and terraform it. The Suicide Squad members, Harley Quinn, Deadshot, Captain Boomerang, and King Shark, are all freed from prison. That's good, but they have a bomb in their head. That's bad. Working under the imposing Commander Waller, they need to come up with a way to kill the Justice League members and save the world before Waller loses her patience and pops their heads like party balloons. So it's a cool setup, right? And as I said in my preview, the setup is genuinely excellent. You arrive at the Hall of Justice where you can gaze in awe at holograms and statues of these heroes. You get to look at all of their stuff, you can hear them spout inspiring backstory and exposition. It's cool. You are conditioned in these moments to revere these heroes as gods, because they kind of are, and that not only makes them very imposing narrative forces, but it also makes the actual job of killing them seem all but impossible for a group of anti-heroes whose arsenal consists of oversized mallets, boomerangs, and teeth. The opening hours of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League are absolutely the high point for the entire game, because the setup and construction for this story is expertly handled. You really can't fault it, with your early interactions with Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern, and Batman being pitch perfect introductions. You were just like, hell yeah man, this rules, can't wait to see where this goes. Sadly, it doesn't go well, but we'll get to that part later. First, we have to recognize the extraordinary presentation factor here. These character designs are incredible. The Suicide Squad members have never looked better. I've never seen a better rendition of Wonder Woman anywhere. That includes the movies. Batman's suit looks sick as hell. They all just look fantastic, and they're brought to life as never before thanks to what may well be the best facial animation work I've seen in a video game. I mean, we're really splitting hairs here between the Naughty Dog stuff and Guardians of the Galaxy and this. The bottom line, it is incredible as a technical feat. Each of these character designs and animations are remarkable. Shout out to the voice work as well. There are no bad performances in this game, just none. All of them are fantastic. Tara Strong as Harley Quinn. Man, every time she opens her mouth, I'm like, please do not stop talking. Deborah Wilson plays Commander Waller, and Wilson does not know how to turn in a bad performance. Daniel Lapine plays Captain Boomerang, and look, there are a few moments in the script where they lean a little too hard into some Aussie slang that we haven't used for quite a while now, but overall, he does a great job of making it work. Samoa Joe plays King Shark and nails every line. The only problem being that he's kind of just Drax 2.0, and having seen so much of Drax over the past decade, it does take the edge off his character a little bit. And finally, the late, great Kevin Conroy does a remarkable job as always, albeit within the constraints of a script that, I don't know, doesn't really let him shine, but we'll talk about that later. So all of this stuff works really well. In fact, some of it is top shelf. The problem is when you start getting into the back half of the game where things utterly collapse. Side characters are a good example. You meet them early on and it's kind of cool because you're like, hey, the Penguin, he's in Metropolis. Wonder what this wily old bird has in store for us this time. The answer? Absolutely nothing. He has an intro mission, and after that he is nothing but a vendor that hands out generic open world missions and lets you craft guns. That is it. Poison Ivy is in this game, and that is a minor spoiler, but she's not the sultry seductress she often is depicted as. Here she's a child, like literally a 6-year-old, and that could be interesting, I guess, but again, she just becomes another vendor NPC. You've essentially taken one of the most interesting Batman villains and removed her defining personality trait without adding anything back to replace it. By far and away the biggest issue though is the inconsistent morality of the heroes and anti-heroes and the unreconciled power balance between the Suicide Squad and the Justice League. And to make that point, I really do need to go into major spoilers. So there's a timestamp on screen now. There's also a chapter in the YouTube video player. If you don't want any spoilers, just skip this section because I'm now about to discuss some of the biggest moments in the game. Okay, so the Suicide Squad, they're bad guys, right? Well, sort of. They're more like anti-heroes depending on which day you catch them, and certainly here in this game, they are meant to be less sociopathic, less malevolent. You see that in their budding camaraderie as a team, but also in their concern for protecting innocent civilians, for example. There's also just a general absence of them saying or doing evil, fucked up shit, which kind of makes them seem more like heroes than anti-heroes. Except when they all of a sudden turn around and do some really fucked up shit. So for example, when you kill the Flash, and then Captain Boomerang proceeds to piss on his corpse. So it's like, okay, look, I'm not pearl clutching here, I'm actually okay with this as a concept, but have we built that character up to the point where that makes sense? I don't think so. We know that Boomerang doesn't really like Flash, like he kind of hates him, but is he such a grub that he'd piss on his corpse? Maybe, but to me this moment just felt really out of place. Batman's death has been discussed a lot. I do not agree with the commentary that his death is somehow disrespectful to Kevin Conroy's memory, nor do I agree that Batman is so sacred a character that he can't be killed. But I do agree that his death was very badly handled. Harley Quinn executes him in cold blood on a park bench while Batman hurls patronizing abuse at her. He's just a mind-controlled puppet at that point, and Harley essentially puts him out of his misery. Harley's had her fair share of experience with the clinically insane and mentally broken, and for her to just dome Batman like that in the middle of a park so as to attract Superman's attention, I don't know, man, it just feels like Rocksteady could have arrived at a better ending point for Batman, but also for Harley Quinn, since her finally killing Batman marks a serious endpoint for her as well. In Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, the inherent moral compass of the anti-heroes never feels properly calibrated, which is why it can often start spinning at a moment's notice before quickly resetting to a predictable north. For us as players, it's disorienting, and we can't quite tell if Rocksteady are writing heroes, or anti-heroes, or arch-criminals. There's no such confusion when it comes to the Justice League though. These guys are just straight up, stone-cold, mustache-twirling villains, and it's a really shitty rendition of each of these characters because of it. The entire time, Green Lantern is calling you convicts to lean into the whole space cop thing, Batman is belittling you and murdering civilians, the Flash delights in the idea of torture, and gleefully rips out Lex Luthor's still beating heart. This would have been kinda cool had there been moments when these heroes were able to snap out of it, and Batman could stand over the corpse of a murdered cop and be like, what have I done? Where Green Lantern could have a moment of clarity and try to destroy his ring rather than risk more innocence. Where Lex Luthor could somehow bring Superman back from the brink, and Superman would then ask Lex to kill him because he's the only one that can. I'm just spitballing here, but there's nothing close to any of this except for one brief snippet when Wonder Woman has Barry in her lasso, and he's like, you have to kill us, Diana. That's the one moment where it gets interesting, because you can see these characters underneath their mind control. Written as they are, these aren't heroes at all, they're just one-dimensional facsimiles. They feel like they're just clones of the Justice League, all of their power but none of their personality or morality. As such, you don't feel anything when you kill them. Killing Superman is a really big deal, and yet when he's dead, he's just dead. I think Rocksteady kinda knew this as well, which is why none of the Justice League members get an actual death scene when they say their final words. When you kill Superman, he just keels over, and then he's a corpse that's barely acknowledged, and then it's straight on to the next scene. Killing the Justice League is a very motivating concept for an audience, and it's pretty remarkable that Rocksteady found a way to make you feel almost nothing when you take down each of its members. The only thing they managed to deliver is cheap shock value. The shock of pissing on the Flash's corpse, the shock of executing Batman in cold blood on a park bench, the shock of how anticlimactic it is to kill the Superman. Kill your darlings? Yeah, absolutely, but if you're gonna do that, you have to make it mean something. Rocksteady absolutely failed to make any of these deaths mean anything at all. Okay, so that's the spoiler part over. Let's wrap up the story block. When I did my preview for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, the story was the thing I was most excited to experience, because those opening hours were fantastic, and when coupled with Rocksteady's strong storytelling pedigree, I was extremely confident that we were in for a great show. Sadly, I was totally wrong. The story is a mix of undercooked and underutilized characters and side characters, a confusing cast of main characters, and a disappointingly shallow Justice League, a bunch of rushed conclusions that rely on shock value, and an ending that is deliberately unresolved so as to set up for the infinite live service future. I was never really expecting to love the gameplay side of this package, and so to have been let down so comprehensively by this story is a real disappointment, and it's sad to think that we waited 9 years for this. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is set in Metropolis, and there could be no more starker comparison between Rocksteady's previous cityscape and this one. Gotham was dark, gothic, brooding, blanketed in perpetual night and rain. You stalked its goon-infested streets just as often as you grappled and glided across its gargoyle-adorned rooftops. Metropolis is the opposite of all of those things. It's bright, it's colourful even, it does have spans of night, but your memories of it will surely be those of it during the broad daylight, which certainly feels like the city's default setting. It's Art Deco rather than Gothic, and it does achieve a visual distinctiveness that's at times pleasant. Metropolis is at its best when you're standing high above it, surveying its rooftops as they cascade out before you, punctuated by a small but notable collection of landmarks, like a gold statue of Superman, the LexCorp headquarters, or the Empire State-like Daily Planet building. There have been comparison videos that compare Arkham Knight's Gotham to Suicide Squad's Metropolis, with the suggestion being that Gotham looks better and is more responsive than Metropolis, a city that arrived some 9 years after Arkham Knight. I think those comparisons are interesting for sure, as there's definitely something to be said about how much attention to detail has gone into Gotham versus Metropolis, but the context really matters. When you are making a game that is a 4-player co-op experience where all 4 players can go wherever they want at any time, and where you can expect dozens of enemies to be on the map at any moment, that imposes a massive number of restrictions on how detailed and responsive your world can be. That was a point that was made, ironically enough, by Warner Brothers themselves when they released Gotham Knights. So I do think that Gotham City looks better and is more detailed, sure, but I think that's an unfair comparison. Personally, I think Metropolis looks pretty good, but really its visual design and the destructibility of its assets are the least of my concerns. The biggest problem with Metropolis is that all of it feels exactly the same, because the gameplay model demands that it all feels exactly the same. If you design a combat model built around characters jumping really high all of the time, then there always needs to be plenty of room above them for them to do that. As such, there are essentially no indoor spaces in this entire video game. There's one fight I can recall which happens in a stadium and Green Lantern kind of puts a makeshift roof on it, but otherwise you are always fighting on rooftops, always. That means you never walk the streets of Metropolis, you just bound over it. You never need to contend with a specific location that has a unique layout demanding a specific style of play. You just jump, run up walls, jump some more, rinse and repeat until you can't take it anymore. If I was a level designer working at Rocksteady, I'd feel kind of frustrated that I put this much work into designing so many things that the player will never see or use. Because unless that thing is a rooftop, it is utterly useless to the player and it may as well be invisible. As such, Metropolis is one of the most forgettable video game environments I have ever spent time in, and that is nothing to do with art or level design, it is entirely down to the core game design and how it neuters any meaningful relationship to space. It's also largely devoid of any activities that might liven it up. There are some traversal-based Riddler challenges as well as some Riddler trophies to collect. Outside of that, there's floating drones, which you just need to shoot down for daily rewards. I don't know who came up with that as an idea for an activity, but this one should have stayed in the drafts. There's also some patrolling enemies and rooftop placements, but they hang out in such small groups that a single well-placed grenade can dispatch them, and killing them gives you an infinitesimally small number of crafting resources. There is never a reason to stop on your way towards your next mission to engage these patrols, because they're never worth the few seconds of detour it takes to dispatch them. So, what are you doing on this map then? Well, this is where things start to get really dire, because we're now going to have to talk about the campaign missions and side missions. And it's really hard to know where to start here. When I first booted up this game, I really expected to see something similar to what we've seen from other looter shooter campaigns, which is a mix of more linear, curated missions that feel at home in a single player campaign, as well as open world style missions that leverage broader looter shooter game design. What's truly staggering about Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is that there's basically none of those linear, single player style missions. I would say in the 10-ish hour campaign, approximately 30 minutes is spent in those sorts of experiences. The rest are just open world activities over and over again. If you've played Destiny or Diablo or whatever, you'd be familiar with public events. Suicide Squad's entire campaign is just a collection of public events. There's one where you have to save some hostages and then deliver them to the battle bus. Another where you need to collect data shards and then return them to the battle bus. Another where you need to escort a car from one place to another. There's one where you need to protect Poison Ivy's plants for a really fucking long time. These missions go forever. There's 2 or 3 other types, but they're really just variations on these other ones. Just jumping between rooftops, killing some dudes, and dunking some things. Do that for 10 hours, and that, no word of a lie, is the Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League campaign. It is an astounding low when compared to even the more maligned looter shooters. Avengers and Redfall both had significantly more diversity in their campaign mission design. Vanilla Destiny had more locations and used them to create linear scripted missions, plus it also had numerous strikes at launch. The Division 1 and 2 both had numerous internal spaces where missions could be set, in addition to a vastly more interesting open world to explore. The closest comparison is Anthem, in that all of it is set on one map and the entire campaign is open world bullshit. But even Anthem had multiple enemy factions to contend with, where Suicide Squad has only one. Though I'm not suggesting that Anthem launched in a better state than this, I'm just saying that in terms of the campaign mission design, Suicide Squad is among the worst we have ever seen from a AAA looter shooter at launch. And to cap all of this off, the bosses. Oh my god, these bosses. So, earlier, I commented that this game does not reconcile the power imbalance between the Suicide Squad and the Justice League. It would take a lot of imagination to come up with ways for the Suicide Squad to be able to kill Superman, both in terms of the narrative conceit underpinning that, as well as the encounter design that would make that feel right. Like, yeah, sure, you could just shoot Superman with kryptonite bullets, right? But that would be kind of disappointing. Well, get ready to be disappointed, because you will absolutely shoot Superman with kryptonite bullets in a boss battle that just has him frantically flying around like a march fly. The Flash fight is basically the same as the Superman fight, in that you just counter-shot him to make him vulnerable and then shoot him a bunch. The Batman fight, oh man, like, I'm not going to show it here because its visuals are the one thing that this fight has got going for it. There are no mechanics to this boss battle, none. It is amateur hour stuff, and I'm stunned that Rocksteady produced this. There's also a Green Lantern fight which just involves shooting his constructs a bunch and then shooting him. So did you notice the through line here? It's shoot the Justice League. Sounds pretty dumb, right? And it is, but when you build a game around shooting guns, then you either need to be able to shoot the Justice League to death, or you need to be able to design interesting boss encounters that allow you to damage the Justice League in other ways. Rocksteady chose the first option, and as such, the boss battles here are all a colossal disappointment that makes every victory feel cheap, unearned, anticlimactic, and unsatisfying. Combined with the lifeless open world, the repetitive mission design, and the poorly written story, the campaign experience for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is a total bust, and the endgame is no better.
I am buried in the committer's weakness. Strike!
Look, we'll keep this part brief because there isn't a lot to talk about. When the final showdown with Brainiac happens, you learn that the fight continues, because of course it does. It's a live service game with the season pass and battle passes and cash shop, and the fight must go on forever. The first thing you're going to want to do are your supporter side missions. So each vendor you unlock during the campaign, like Penguin or Poison Ivy or whatever, they have a quest chain associated with them. It's still just doing more of the exact same missions from the campaign, only Rocksteady have found an innovative way to make them way worse. They add these infuriating restrictions, like you can only deal damage with grenades, and if you're out of grenades, then bad luck. You can only deal damage with counters, so you're just standing around like a dickhead waiting for the enemy to shoot you so you can counter them. There are like 6 of these quest chains, and they just suck so bad, and the only good thing about them is that when you're done with them, these restrictions that they impose never seem to surface again. After that, the main goal are what's called incursions. These are actually trips to the multiverse where you're visiting other versions of Metropolis. You're doing the exact same missions as in your version of Metropolis, but here you're able to adjust the difficulty of the challenge, which adds mission modifiers, things like exploding enemies or whatever, To do these missions, you need to do regular open world missions in your metropolis to earn the currency that will let you buy into those. So the loop is do a bunch of open world missions so you can do the same missions but slightly more difficult in a different metropolis, and rinse and repeat that until the heat death of the universe. When I first settled into this groove, I was like, whoa, this sucks. But it got way worse when I realized that these incursion missions that you do when you buy into them through the portal, whatever, they aren't randomized. The open world missions on your metropolis are at least random. But these incursion missions are the exact same 3 missions on the exact same tile sets over and over again. I couldn't believe it. I'm not sure if these like rotate on a weekly schedule or something, but I'm certainly not sticking around to find out. In addition to that, there's an infinite duration horde mode. I did that a little bit. At this point, I'd already spent around 20 hours in the game, and doing the endless horde mode thing just wasn't really what I was up for at that point. There's one interesting system involving doing certain challenges like slide kills or melee takedowns or whatever, and when you do enough of them, it summons this hit squad who come to take you out. It's the exact same type of enemies you've been fighting the whole game, but it's cool, and you get a little bit of loot out of it, and that's about it. The main chase here is for notorious items. Now these are your really powerful endgame items with some big modifiers on them that open up new builds and playstyles. The more you grind out those endgame incursions and the higher you crank the difficulties, the more of those become unlocked in the loot pool, and then you can just keep grinding them as regular drops. That really is the whole endgame. It's 6 random open world mission types in Metropolis to earn a currency that lets you do 3 specific open world mission types so you can unlock and grind out notorious items. Now this is a truly terrible endgame, and it's weird that some people are like, nah, actually this is really good, man. That's a good amount of content if you compare it to other live service looter shooters at their launches. And I'm like, it's been 14 years since Borderlands launch, kicking off this genre. The fact that very few games have got their endgames right at launch does not justify Suicide Squad's failings. It's kind of the opposite. It's like, really? We really haven't learned the lessons that 14 years worth of failure have imparted? We're still launching live service games with 10-hour campaigns and 3 missions on repeat at the endgame, only now we're charging $70 and change at release instead of $60 or $100 if you plan to play 3 days early. And I know people are going to be like, oh man, there's more content coming, just be patient. Well, we have been patient. We waited 9 years for this. If you want to launch a game that has a great endgame at launch, and you want to give us more after that, then great, fantastic. But if you want to launch a game with a bad campaign, basically no endgame, and an IOU note that says, see you next month, then no, I'm not okay with that. Furthermore, I can only review the game in front of me, and if I was fool enough to believe every promise that live service roadmaps have made over the years, I'd have been laughed off this platform long ago. This endgame is shit. Maybe it gets better, maybe it doesn't, but right now, it's shit. And after reviewing a dozen of these sort of games that have launched with shit endgames, it just sucks to see how little progress we've made on this front over the years.
Yeah, looking forward to killing the Justice League and all, but you know, these guns are a bit shit.
When it comes to combat, itemization, and progression, I'm going to preface all of this by saying that this whole review is subjective, as all reviews are, but this section in particular is subjective because I've heard from plenty of people that really like the combat and the loot, and if there was more endgame content, they could see themselves continuing to play this game because the core gameplay loop appeals to them. I'm not saying they're wrong, I'm just saying that that's not the conclusion that I have reached, and if combat looks and sounds appealing to you, then you should probably give it a crack at whatever price point you feel works for you, because there's every chance that it might click for you in a way that it didn't for me. Personally, I did not enjoy this combat. I think it's fun enough that I was able to play this game for around about 20 to 25 hours without me hating the combat, but I do think it's badly designed, and I'm really glad that after this review is done, I won't have to play any more of it. There are so many issues with combat that this is going to sound a bit ranty, but I want to start at the very highest level, and that is the fact that the character kits are centered on guns instead of on the characters themselves. I do feel as though this point has been made repeatedly prior to release, during the previews and in other reviews, so I won't belabor it here. But yeah, it sucks that King Shark is reliant on a minigun and Captain Boomerang is reliant on a sniper or an SMG or whatever. It is fundamentally less interesting than if you built unique character kits based on Captain Boomerang's boomerang, or Harley's mallets and explosives, or King Shark's teeth. But what makes this even worse is that the guns themselves are terrible. I'm seeing commentary out there like, oh, the gunplay is really tight, it feels good to shoot things, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? These weapons have no personality whatsoever. No unique recoil patterns, no distinctive sound design. There aren't different archetypes with subtle but important handling differences that give them a unique feel. These weapons are just auto-aim driven, zero recoil stat sticks. I'm stunned that you could base your game around guns and put absolutely no effort into making these guns feel like actual guns. Go and play Remnant or Outriders or The Division if you want to see how you do third-person weapon design where you can actually feel the distinctiveness of a weapon in your hands. This is a massive, massive oversight, and I'm really surprised no one else is talking about this. For me personally, it was one of the biggest reasons I just couldn't enjoy this combat. So, having said all of that, if combat is based on guns, you ideally then need to design a complementary set of character abilities that still deliver on the core fantasy of each of those anti-heroes as best you can. Rocksteady have tried to do that through traversal, melee attacks, and talent trees, but despite their best efforts, it just doesn't come together. Traversal is the one standout success story within the combat framework. Each character has their own way of getting around, and it's very deeply baked into their kit. So Harley is all about swinging into the action, and King Shark is all about these big powerbomb dives, etc. These traversal skills aren't particularly true to each character's core conceit, but if we kind of hand wave away that stuff, it's fun to move around with all of these tools, and the majority of combat is based around positioning. Reaching your foe or getting a good line of sight on them is 70% of the battle here, so if this stuff didn't work, then this whole package would be an utter catastrophe. The melee stuff is unfortunately very one-dimensional. There's only one melee attack, there are no combos. Melee is often used to apply debuffs or harvest shields more than anything else. You can build towards melee and improve its efficiency, but even then it doesn't quite work as well as it should, and it always feels very clunky to use given the relationship between melee and camera in this game, a point we'll come back to. Outside of that, there's a sort of melee finisher you can use on a cooldown, there are grenades, there's a super ability, and that's about it. Certain talent choices lend themselves to certain playstyles, like King Shark being a brawler, or Deadshot being more lethal with a sniper rifle, but a lot of that manifests in passive buffs that don't really change how it feels to play these characters. Bottom line, just as weapons lack a distinctive feel when they're in your hands, these characters similarly lack a distinctive feel. Outside of their traversal, they each feel too similar to each other to play, and that is such a wasted opportunity when you're talking about a roster as diverse as this. Say what you will about the Avengers, but when it came to distinctive character kits, Crystal Dynamics understood the assignment, and Rocksteady absolutely did not. Next, we can talk about the overall hygiene factors of good combat, namely things like targeting, camera, visual clarity, etc. All of this stuff is a complete disaster here in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Yeah, you can target enemies at range, sure, but it is extremely difficult, nigh on impossible, to target specific enemies with a melee attack if they are clumped up together. You just have to press a button and hope it works. That's particularly annoying when you want to harvest a shield from one of them who is vulnerable to that, and I've died on more than a few occasions owing to this issue. Next is the baffling link between melee and camera. Watch this. So what's actually happening here is that whenever I melee, my camera will always swing in close behind me and then point up to position me for an air juggle with my weapon. Cool concept, except it is utterly nauseating to watch this play out like this over and over again, especially when you are in tight spaces where the camera hasn't got many places to go. You can focus on melee in this game, but this camera work is so bad that I would never want to do that because I would never want to endure this. I mained King Shark during my playthrough, but I actually found Deadshot the most pleasant to play because his melee attack is still ranged, which means the camera doesn't lose its fucking mind every 2 seconds. And yeah, visual clarity and visual noise. This was a big meme that went around before the game's release, and I thought people were kind of cherry-picking screenshots or whatever, but the final game is actually way worse, as the later game combination of high-end build modifiers and increased enemy density makes the game regularly unpassable, just a totally unreadable confetti of particle vomit obscuring your view, and when combined with the awful camera work, this is one of the most unpleasant looking games I've played. I'm actually really glad that I don't have to play any more of this, but I'm almost more relieved that I no longer need to watch any more of it, and I have never felt that ever playing any game ever. With mission design, character kits, and weapons all feeling really homogenized, there was a desperate need for a diverse roster of enemies to fight against, necessitating different tactics, setting up a sort of combat chess framework like you'd see in any great shooter. Unsurprisingly, at this point, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League does not deliver that either. There is one enemy faction with basically 3 types of enemies: grunts, annoying snipers, and meat sack brutes. There are also tanks and helicopters, but they're much more rare. Later on, you do unlock some Justice League augmented troop types, so they're the same grunts, but now they've been merged with the Flash so they can move faster, and the snipers, they get some bat blood, and now they can turn invisible, making them even more annoying to fight. These variants add nothing to the equation, and because there are so few enemies, and because they're so basic in their construction, combat feels extraordinarily mindless and repetitive. It's some of the worst and most limited enemy design we've ever seen in a looter shooter. The last line of defense to bring some diversity to this core is the itemization and progression, and here your mileage may vary greatly. It must be said that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has a number of very flexible and very functional loot and customization systems. You can craft weapons, you can re-roll weapon stats, you can apply status effects and make those effects more potent, you can masterwork your weapons, allowing you to customize them more freely, you can unlock endgame gear sets with game-changing modifiers that do this or that. There's a lot. There's also a Paragon system allowing you to infinitely level your character with minor stat buffs. It often takes live services many content updates to reach this number of gear and progression systems, and Suicide Squad is launching with all of them on day one, so that is really good. I will also say that some of this loot is pretty cool and interesting. The main gear set this season is based around Bane, and it will essentially confuse nearby enemies, and then you deal bonus damage to them when they're confused. And they also drop a power-up which you need to manually pick up, which boosts your damage further. I've unlocked a grenade type which does a shit ton of damage, but it also damages me when it sits in my inventory, so I'm encouraged to kind of dump it as soon as I get a new one. There are lots more examples like that, absolutely. But mostly, the gear and talents that I unlock, they just feel like passive buffs that kind of do stuff without making my character any more interesting to play. Like, yeah, I can immediately craze an entire group of enemies with a single melee attack, and I do more damage to them. But then what? I still just shoot them all the same. Because the foundational aspects of this game are so weak, the additional stuff that you put on top of that does not enrich it, at least in my personal view. I've seen plenty of commentary from people being like, oh, I made this build that does this thing with my grenades and my melee or whatever. Cool, like I said at the top, if you're liking it, great. For me, I did not get a single piece of gear or unlock a single talent that made this game feel better to play. I do more damage, I produce more explosions, I create more visual noise, but combat at max level in the endgame feels just as unrewarding and messy as it does at level 1. And that's not an issue that live service updates are going to be able to fix, because that is about the very core foundations of this game's design. Stuff so deeply baked into it that it will never change, because to do so would require a total overhaul of the combat framework, and I just can't see Warner Brothers green-lighting that sort of overhaul, because personally I just can't see how this goes the distance as a live service. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League went live 3 days early for those who bought the $100 deluxe version. Only many of those people didn't get the full 3 days of access, because as soon as the game went live, service had to be taken down again owing to a game-breaking bug. The game was down for nearly 12 hours, and because this is an always online live service game, you can't play offline even when playing solo. Rocksteady have said that they may add an offline mode in the future, but I would not put big money on that because there is no return on investment for Warner Brothers in doing that. That $100 version comes with a collection of classic cosmetic skins, and I was genuinely pretty stunned when I logged in to apply those skins, and I noticed that I had been given the starter versions of those skins, and that there are multiple extra components and color swaps available, and if I wanted to get the full version of the skin that Warner Brothers had so generously included in the $100 version of this game, I'd have to give them another 30 Australian dollars. That really does tell you everything you need to know about what this game is, why it was made, and how much value Warner Brothers are trying to deliver at point of sale. They can't even give you a skin for $100 US without putting their hand out to ask for more. Rocksteady and Warner Brothers have said that future gameplay content will be free, financed by a battle pass offering cosmetics, as well as a cash shop selling skins for like 40 bucks a pop or something ludicrous. Free content in exchange for whales purchasing skins sounds pretty good, right? Here's the thing though, this game in its launch weekend achieved a max concurrent player count of 13,500 people on Steam. Yes, sure, PlayStation and Xbox numbers aren't included here, but there's absolutely no reason to think that they'd be proportionately different. The first Rocksteady game in 9 years, hundreds of millions of dollars spent across development and marketing, and it is, without question, a flop. This is in addition to scathing reviews. The title currently sits at a weak 63 on OpenCritic, as well as some pretty hostile word of mouth. Do we imagine then that the good souls at Warner Brothers HQ are looking at this and thinking, time to double down, put more money into this, if we just give the consumer more free stuff, they're gonna love it? No, of course not. Right now, they are surely looking at these metrics and they're thinking, how do we make our money back? I suspect it'll be a variety of things. I suspect the promise of free future content is not one we should bank on, and they'll probably have to start charging for some of that stuff. I also expect elements of the gameplay will get monetized as well. Bethesda did exactly the same thing with Fallout 76 back in the day, promising that they would only sell cosmetics before eventually selling all manner of booster and convenience items. Hell, they even sold a monthly subscription for that game. I'm sure Warner Brothers will be considering any and all options at this point. And here's the more dire prediction. I just don't see how this survives. I genuinely don't. And that's actually less to do with the disappointing campaign or the current lack of endgame content, and far more to do with the fundamentals of what this game is. I just don't believe that its combat model is robust enough to withstand the prolonged exposure that a live service demands. And I believe that fixing those issues is a job too big for the live service business model. Like Diablo 4 and Destiny 2 both had issues at launch, a lot of them in fact. But those games were clearly fixable, and they were too big to fail for their publishers. Do you really think that Warner Brothers sees the Suicide Squad as too big to fail? Harry Potter? Yeah, absolutely. If this was a live service Harry Potter game that went belly up, I can see Warner Brothers spending endless cash to get this thing going. But Suicide Squad? I don't know, man. I personally doubt it. From the moment this game was revealed, people really had it out for it, in large part because it was frustrating to see Rocksteady abandon its heritage as a studio that makes brilliant single-player games, and instead be put to work on a live service looter, a genre that had already claimed a number of scalps like Crystal Dynamics, Platinum Games, and Arcane Studios. I was always willing to keep an open mind about this and see how it all shakes out. I like live services, and if you can make me a good one, I'll play it. But if you can't, and you're charging $100 for a painfully repetitive 10-hour campaign and a barely existent endgame, then I'm not only going to be disappointed, but I'm also going to be frustrated. Frustrated that 14 years after this genre emerged, it feels like every single release is repeating the exact same mistakes. Frustrated that $100 doesn't even buy you a complete skin on the cash shop. But more than anything else, frustrated that this genre and this business model has claimed yet another scalp. 9 years for Rocksteady to follow up on one of the most seminal trilogies in the history of video games, and this is what we got. What a shame. If nothing else, I truly hope that this is the last time we see a talented, single-player studio wasted on the live service golden goose chase, but I strongly suspect that it will not be. I absolutely do not recommend the Suicide Squad kill the Justice League.
Have you ever dreamed of starting your own business? It doesn't have to be the next Amazon, it could just be you making stuff you like to make, selling it online for a neat profit. Maybe you want to provide a service, giving your time and expertise to others. Whatever it is you might want to do, you're probably going to need a website, and there's no better place to build a website than Squarespace. Squarespace provide intuitive end-to-end tools allowing you to make a professional-looking website in minutes. It starts with their templates. Just choose one that interests you, and you can immediately start customizing it to your taste. After that, you can start utilizing all of Squarespace's e-commerce functionality. It has everything essential to transacting business online: ordering and inventory management, support for postage and tracking, accounting support to ensure you're tracking your tax liabilities, plus it supports a huge range of back-end payment options like Stripe, PayPal, and Afterpay. Back in the day, you had to pay companies tens of thousands of dollars to set this stuff up for you, and money every single month to manage it. Now you can do this stuff yourself for a fraction of the cost, making it easier than ever before for you to turn that business idea of yours into a reality. If you're interested and you want to check it out, then visit Squarespace to start building your website through their free trial. And if you want to get serious, use offer code SKILLUP for 10% off your purchase of a domain name. Thanks Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.